For as long as I could remember, I was the fixer, the dependable son who never asked for much, who showed up when it mattered, and who, despite years of being overlooked, kept believing that maybe this time things would be different. When I lost my job at the architecture firm and couldn't afford rent, I swallowed my pride and asked my parents if I could move back home. Dad offered a deal. Renovate the spare room, and in return, I could live there rent-free for a year while getting back on my feet. It wasn't ideal, but it felt like a step forward, a project I could pour myself into and maybe, finally, be seen for what I could do. For 2 months, I worked tirelessly. After dawn until dusk. I laid floorboards with perfect seams, sanded trim until it gleamed, and painted the walls in the exact shade of sage green my mom always said she loved. I didn't just fix a room, I poured every bit of hope and effort into that space. It was more than renovation. It was my way of proving that I belonged, that I deserved space in their lives. I spent over $3,700 from my savings, trusting that they would keep their word. When the room was done, I asked, "So when can I move my stuff in?" The silence was deafening. My dad looked away and casually dropped the bomb. They decided to give the room to my sister Tara. Her lease downtown was ending, and she wanted to save money. "You'll figure something out," he said, as if I hadn't just spent weeks making their house better. As if my contributions could be dismissed with a shrug. I didn't argue, I didn't cry, I just packed. Mom offered the basement, a moldy, half-flooded space I wouldn't wish on anyone, and tried to guilt me with a $100 bill at the door. I left it on the table. That night, I slept in my truck behind a 24-hour grocery store. Not because I had no one, but because I was done begging to be treated like family. They promised me a home if I fixed that room. I held up my end. They broke theirs. And in that quiet betrayal, I saw them clearly for the first time, not as parents, but as people who would always take more than they gave. The first night sleeping in my truck was rough, physically and emotionally. I'd spent the day hauling everything I owned out of the house I thought would be my home, only to end up in a grocery store parking lot, reclining a stiff seat and trying not to cry. I stared up at the ceiling of my pickup, my back aching, my chest hollow. I wasn't even shocked. After years of being second to my sister Tara, being dismissed, used, and overlooked, this just felt like the final blow I should have seen coming. By morning, I had one name in mind: Mike. We hadn't spoken in a while. Our paths drifted apart after college when I started working 60-hour weeks and he took a job across town. But Mike had always been the guy who showed up when it mattered. I didn't know if he'd answer or care, but I hit call anyway. "Aaron? Man, it's been forever," he said after a few rings. I didn't even sugarcoat it. "I need a place to stay." 2 hours later, I was standing in his kitchen with a cup of coffee warming my hands, explaining the whole thing. How I renovated a room my parents promised me, only to be kicked out for my sister. Mike's face twisted in disbelief. "They did what? After you paid for everything? That's beyond messed up." He offered me his spare room. Just a twin bed and a dresser, but it felt like luxury after 2 nights in my truck. That night, I slept better than I had in months. No footsteps pacing outside my door. No guilt-trip voices through the walls. Just quiet. Peace. Over the next few days, I started to breathe again. I helped Mike around the house, cooked a few meals, and slowly began piecing myself back together. The memory of the renovation still stung, but the more space I had from my parents, the clearer I saw it wasn't just one betrayal. It had been years of putting in effort, of giving more than I ever received. Mike helped me reconnect with an old contact in the architecture world. Someone who needed drafting help for a small project. It wasn't glamorous or high-paying, but it was mine. It was a start. In that small spare room, surrounded by someone who actually saw me as a person, not a tool, I remembered who I was. Not just the fixer, not just the afterthought, but someone who deserved to be treated with respect, someone who didn't need to beg for love. I was done proving myself to people who never intended to see my worth. It started with a soft spot near the closet, barely noticeable, just a faint give beneath my foot as I pulled up the old carpet. A darker patch of plywood, a slight musty smell, and something in my gut told me it wasn't right. "Dad," I called out, pointing it out with concern. There's probably moisture damage here. We should pull up this section of subfloor and check for rot before I lay anything over it." He waved me off with a scoff. "It's an old house, Aaron. A few squeaky boards won't kill anyone." I should have pushed harder. I should have insisted. But I'd already been walking on eggshells for weeks, trying not to give him a reason to take the room away. So I followed orders, laid the new hardwood, top-quality oak right over that spot, installed a moisture barrier, said a silent prayer, and did my best. And then they kicked me out. Tara needed the room, apparently. Her lease was ending, she deserved more support, and I could always crash in the moldy basement, they said. I packed my things, left quietly, and tried to move on with my life. 2 days later, the text started. First from Mom, "Sweetie, something smells weird in the house." Then Dad, "You need to come back and fix whatever you did." The audacity nearly made me laugh. I'd done everything by the book, except ignore that one warning sign they refused to acknowledge. When I finally answered one of Mom's calls, she sounded panicked. "The whole house stinks. We can't even stay in it. It's like something died. The contractor says it's black mold. He says it came from your renovation." I bit my tongue, choosing my words carefully. I warned Dad about a soft spot under the closet. I told him we needed to pull up the subfloor and inspect it properly. He told me to cover it and move on. Silence. I told her to call a remediation crew and hung up. That night I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying it in my head. How I'd seen the mold specks. How the smell had been just strong enough to worry me. I'd looked up the protocols. I'd known. But he didn't listen. They kicked me out, and now they were living in a house they couldn't breathe in. Mold had spread under the beautiful floor I'd laid. The walls were infected. They had to move out, hire professionals, and pay thousands in repairs. All because they refused to trust me. The worst part? They still tried to blame me. I hadn't heard my father's voice in over a week, not since the mold situation escalated and the house became unlivable. But then, without warning, he showed up at my new job. No call, no email. Just walked straight through the front doors of the architecture firm where I was finally rebuilding my life. "We need to talk," he said, loud enough to draw stares from my coworkers. I walked him outside to the parking lot, jaw clenched, heart pounding. "What do you want?" His face looked drawn, tired, like the weight of everything had finally caught up to him. "This has gone on long enough. Your mother is a wreck. The house still isn't fixed. Tara had to find a new apartment. You need to come fix this." I blinked, stunned by the audacity. "Fix what exactly?" "You know what?" he growled. "The mold. That room. You laid the floors. This is your responsibility." A bitter laugh escaped me. "I told you about the soft spot under the subfloor. I begged you to let me tear it up and inspect it properly. You told me to cover it up and move on." He didn't deny it. He just took a step closer. "You're good with your hands, Aaron. You can fix this. We'll let you stay afterward, this time for real." I stared at him, a strange calm settling over me like a warm coat. For the first time in 32 years, I didn't feel the need to justify myself, to beg for approval, to explain what should have been obvious. "No," I said simply. He blinked. "What?" "No, I'm not coming back. I'm not fixing anything. You don't get to kick me out the minute I finish the work, then come crawling back when things fall apart." His voice hardened. "If you walk away now, don't bother coming back." I nodded. "I never planned to." He stood there, stunned. For a moment, I thought I saw fear in his eyes. Fear that the scapegoat he'd always relied on was finally slipping away for good. But I turned my back and walked back inside without looking back. That night, I changed my number. Sometimes the strongest statement you can make isn't yelling, arguing, or proving a point. It's walking away and meaning it. It didn't take long for the smear campaign to begin. Within days of walking away from my parents' mold-infested home and refusing to fix the damage they caused, I started getting calls from family I hadn't spoken to in years. My aunt left a voicemail saying she was so disappointed in me. My uncle emailed asking why I stole renovation materials and left the house half-finished. I even heard from an old family friend who asked, "Did you really sabotage your parents' home after all they did for you?" That's when I realized they weren't just angry, they were rewriting the story. According to their new narrative, I had taken their money, botched the renovation, and then vanished when the consequences hit. My mother told relatives I'd betrayed the family after they opened their home out of kindness. My father claimed I'd ignored basic safety standards and left the room dangerous and toxic. None of them mentioned the $3,700 of my own savings I poured into that room, or the fact that I'd flagged the mold risk before ever laying the first board. I blocked their numbers, all of them. Then I deactivated my social media. Every message they sent, every call they tried to sneak through other relatives, I cut off like a dead branch. I was done playing defense against people who twisted the truth to fit their comfort. I moved out of Mike's apartment as soon as I could and found a small one-bedroom place across town. Nothing flashy, worn carpets, outdated kitchen, but it was mine. Quiet, safe, and no one could take it away. I found a steady gig drafting blueprints for small renovation firms. I kept my head down, worked hard, and started saving. My phone stayed blissfully silent. For the first time in years, I breathed without waiting for the next emotional ambush. I could have fought back. I could have gone on Facebook and shared the receipts, the mold warnings, the text from Dad brushing off my concerns. But I didn't. I didn't need to convince anyone anymore. I knew the truth, and that was enough. Rebuilding my life wasn't about proving them wrong. It was about proving to myself that I could live without their approval, their manipulation, their version of love that came with strings attached. I used to think cutting off family was extreme, but what I've learned is this: if they won't respect your boundaries, your time, your truth, then they're not really family. Sometimes survival looks like silence. Sometimes healing begins with no more. And sometimes the best renovation you can ever make is to your own life. I was halfway through reviewing blueprints at my new job when the receptionist buzzed me. "Hey Aaron, there's a man here. Says he's your father. Refuses to leave." My stomach dropped. I hadn't seen or heard from him in weeks, not since I blocked every number tied to my family. I'd moved out, started fresh, set boundaries I never thought I'd have the strength to hold. And now, there he was, standing in the lobby of my office like nothing had changed. I stepped into the hallway and met him outside. His appearance startled me. He looked older, worn down. Maybe it was the stress, or maybe I was seeing him clearly for the first time. Either way, I felt no warmth, only the chill of old wounds reopening. "We need to talk," he started, voice low but firm, like I was still a child who owed him obedience. "No," I said. "We really don't." His eyes narrowed. "Your mother is sick over this. The house is still a disaster. The contractor says it'll cost 10 grand to fix what you did." "I didn't do anything," I said calmly. "I warned you. You ignored me. You kicked me out the second I finished the work." He waved a hand. "That's not how I remember it." "Of course it isn't," I said, "because your memory only works when it benefits you." He stepped closer. "Just come home. Fix the floor. You can stay." I cut him off with a bitter laugh. "Stay? Like last time? Until someone else decides they need my space more?" His face reddened. "We're family, Aaron." "No," I said, my voice steady and unshakable. "We're not. Family doesn't treat each other like this. You used me, lied to me, rewrote what happened so you wouldn't have to feel guilty. That's not family." His expression cracked for a moment, a flicker of fear or maybe realization. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying you're just a man I used to know." I turned and walked back toward the building, leaving him standing alone in the parking lot. That night, I changed my phone number, sent an email to the few relatives I still cared about, asking them not to share it. Some respected my request, some didn't. I cut those people off too, and for the first time in my life, I didn't feel like a son abandoning his family. I felt like a man finally reclaiming his peace. Because love without respect isn't love, and a house built on guilt will never stand. 6 months after walking away, I finally had a place of my own. It wasn't fancy, just a small one-bedroom apartment tucked into a quiet street in a modest neighborhood. The kitchen sink dripped a little, and the balcony overlooked the parking lot instead of a scenic skyline, but it was mine. No one could evict me for a sibling's convenience. No one could decide my worth based on how useful I was that day. I had a new number, a new job, a slowly growing sense of peace that I hadn't known I'd been missing. One afternoon, while grabbing coffee before work, I ran into someone I hadn't seen since everything blew up. My cousin Ellie. She spotted me first. "Aaron?" I turned and gave her a cautious smile. "Hey, Ellie." We sat down at a small table by the window. Her expression was careful, hesitant. "I've heard things," she said gently. "From your mom, from Tara. I'm sure you have." She nodded, sipping her coffee. "They're selling the house. Took out a second mortgage to deal with the mold. Your dad says it never would have happened if he'd listened to me," I finished, shrugging. "Yeah, I warned him. They ignored me, then blamed me when it all fell apart." Ellie didn't argue. "Your mom says she misses you." I stirred my coffee. "She misses what I did for them." There was a beat of silence before she asked, "Do you think you'll ever talk to them again?" I looked out the window for a long moment. The question wasn't new. I'd asked it of myself dozens of times, late at night, while brushing my teeth, while folding laundry in the quiet of my apartment. "Maybe," I said finally, "if they ever truly understand what they did. If they can look at me, not as a tool, not as backup, not as the fixer, but as a person who deserved respect." I looked back at Ellie. "But honestly, I'm not holding my breath." She nodded slowly. "I get that." We finished our coffee in silence, and when she left, she didn't push. She just said, "I'm glad you're doing okay. You seem lighter." I was. For the first time in years, I wasn't carrying the weight of unmet expectations or conditional love. And as I walked home to my tiny, peaceful apartment, I realized something. I didn't need a big house or a perfect family to feel whole. I just needed space to heal, on my own terms. The message came unexpectedly. A quiet buzz on my phone as I sat on the small balcony of my apartment, watching the sun dip below the skyline. It was from Ellie. "I didn't tell them we talked, just thought you should know. They're selling the house. Too many memories, Mom says." I read it twice, then again. Not out of disbelief, but because I wasn't sure what I felt. The house, the one I'd poured 2 months of my life and every cent of my savings into renovating. The house I'd once hoped might finally be a place of belonging. The house where I'd been told to leave the moment the work was done. They were selling it, and somehow it felt right. I looked around my apartment. It was modest, with creaky floorboards and aging appliances, but it was clean, safe, mine. I didn't have to worry about being replaced or resented. I didn't have to walk on eggshells or measure my worth by how useful I was to someone else. I stepped outside again, the evening air cool against my skin. On the table beside me sat a sketch pad with early designs for my first solo project, an affordable housing community designed for dignity and comfort, something I might have never pursued had I stayed trapped in the cycle of guilt and obligation. Ellie's message echoed in my mind. Too many memories. Yeah, I got that. But not all memories are worth keeping. Some are anchors, some are walls. That house had been both. And now it wasn't theirs anymore. Which meant, in a strange way, it was finally over. The house where I'd never felt like I truly belonged. The house that had become a symbol of every broken promise, every conditional expression of love, was no longer theirs to control. It felt symbolic, like I wasn't the only one who had let go. Only difference was, I did it willingly. They did it because they had no other choice. I typed a quick reply to Ellie, "Thanks for letting me know. I hope they find peace, whatever that looks like." Then I put the phone down. Mike would be over soon with takeout, and we'd talk about architecture and life, and maybe laugh about how far we'd come. And later, I'd go to sleep in a bed I paid for, in a home that welcomed me, not because I was useful, but because I mattered. That house is gone now. But more importantly, so is the grip it had on me. And I've never felt more free. Sometimes, the most powerful kind of strength is the one that walks away. Aaron's story teaches us that unconditional loyalty, when not met with respect or recognition, slowly becomes self-betrayal. For years he gave his time, his labor, his money, hoping that one day he'd be seen not as just the handy son, but as someone who mattered beyond what he could provide. But when his own parents gave away the very room he renovated with care and sacrifice, it became clear. They never intended to value him, only to use him. The emotional weight of being the reliable one in a toxic family dynamic often goes unseen. You're expected to carry the burden quietly, to be the fixer, the peacemaker, the one who shows up, even when no one shows up for you. But Aaron's journey reminds us that we are not required to keep proving our worth to people who refuse to see it. Boundaries are not punishments. They are declarations of self-worth. Walking away doesn't mean giving up. It means choosing peace over chaos, clarity over confusion, self-respect over conditional love. And sometimes the most profound healing begins the moment we realize that love, in its healthiest form, doesn't demand sacrifice at the cost of self. Aaron rebuilt more than a room. He rebuilt himself. From being a son who constantly sought approval to a man who redefined what it means to be family, trust, respect, and care, not just blood. To anyone out there who feels unseen, unheard, or unvalued by those closest to them, you are not alone. You deserve love that builds you, not burdens you. And you have the right to say enough without guilt. If Aaron's story resonated with you or reminded you of someone in your life, please take a moment to like this video, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe for more powerful stories about self-worth, healing, and family boundaries. Your support helps us bring these stories to more people who need them. Let's keep growing this community of truth, resilience, and emotional freedom.